Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 5th of November, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. My co-host today is Charles Malet. Welcome to the programme, Charles.
Thank you, Mike.
And joining us via live link is journalist and peace campaigner Vanessa Beeley. Now, later in the programme, Vanessa is going to be covering Sudan, Syria and Iraq and Nigeria. Charles will be reporting on an interview with former head of Mossad and the latest on the claimed spread of blue tongue. And I'm going to be covering Sick Note Britain and Trump's latest in Latin America. But we're going to begin today with the Tommy Robinson court case, which took place yesterday. Will Coleshill has sent us this report.
Good morning, this is Will Coleshill reporting. Today I'm outside Westminster Magistrates Court, here to report on the verdict of the Tommy Robinson terrorism trial, where Tommy Robinson is here to hear whether he'll be found guilty or not in terms of a terrorism charge relating to giving police access to his phone when he entered the country. Under the Terrorism Act brought in during the New Labour era, police are able to detain people coming into the country without access to legal representation and without the right to remain silent. This includes the right to access someone's phone by asking them their PIN code or password. Specifically, the defences being used by Tommy's team are relating to whether the arrest in the first place was legal and also whether he has to provide access to his phone as a journalist. This is very much a question of journalism due to sensitivity and its effect on freedom of the press. So we're going to see what the result is going to be today and whether Tommy Robinson is going back to prison for refusing to allow the police into his phone, where Tommy Robinson argues that there are details of sexual assault victims, there are details of accusations against government failure, government corruption.
At first, police witness statement on the first day, because it showed the whole case against Tommy and the reason for detaining him was completely unlawful. But, you know, they judged, it went on for 2 days. He should have just then on the second day, he should have been able to give his verdict immediately. The case should have been dismissed. The fact that it wasn't, needed the adjournment to make his verdict. It's very, you know, I'm not entirely optimistic.
The case that he's made is that he's a journalist, he has sensitive information on his phone which he would not disclose to the government, because obviously those people would potentially be persecuted.
You can stab 11 people on a train and not be a terrorist, but you don't give your PIN number to where they don't even have a probable cause for terrorism. You are labelled as a terrorist. So this is a terrorism trial. I mean, even Axel Rubakobana, who actually had a Al Qaeda journal and writing was found in his home, was not a terrorist. So here we go, terrorism charge.
Well, that's what it is. It's just judiciary being used to persecute journalists, one, but two, being used as a weapon against the population. That's it. It's as simple as that. No other reason.
Are you worried about this happening to you as a journalist?
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, I think we all run around with spare phones, don't we? Right? I wouldn't cross a border, even just because they might have other phone numbers of the other journalists we work with, right?
Since we have all these extremely oppressive, terrorist laws, quote unquote, we no longer live in a liberal democracy with your rights as an individual to privacy and to simply to remain silent. You are no longer innocent until proven guilty. You are now guilty until proven innocent. That is the backwardsness that we have, which is very frightening for these kind of societies, because the people of these societies rely on their government behaving justly towards them, and people are beginning to realise that is not the case.
I wish there was 12 members of the British public making their decision today, but there's not. There's an appointed judge, the same judge that, unfortunately, I think I might as well say now, let Hugh Edwards off. The mainstream media are their proponents of misinformation. They will lie to you, they'll cut this, Tommy Robinson, terrorism, all this bullshit, whereas reality is that this is targeting me. And you see all the citizen journalists here, if they're successful today, never bring your mobile phone or your device through the border ever again, because this will open the gates for them to come in, because there's a war going to happen in the UK, and it's going to be the mainstream media acting on behalf of the government against the new media. They wanted to shut me down as a message to any other citizen journalist.
Tom! Tommy! What's the camera?
been found that the police discriminated against me based on my belief and my political beliefs. Now, my grievance now, well, not my grievance, first of all, thank you Elon Musk. Thank you Elon Musk, because if it wasn't for Elon Musk, why is it taken an American businessman to fight for our justice here and our fight against terrorism charges for journalists? Now, over there in a minute is going to come the journalists, the mainstream media. Go back now, if you want to see if you can trust the media, go back now and read what they said about this trial. When I was on trial, read what they said. Read the headlines, read the news that they give out, and then read the judge's judgment. Right? Because all those journalists sat on that trial, they knew the police acted unlawfully, they knew they acted illegally, they admitted it in court, and none of the journalists told you that. None of them. They were hoping they had another bench judge that would rule against me, and then you, the public, would know nothing. That judge's verdict is a slam down against the police, an absolute. Read what he says. Yeah, read what he says. Read about their evidence. It was corrupt. It was unlawful. For me, I'm frustrated still. I should be happy. I'm not happy because I shouldn't be put through this time and time again. I walked out of this court last year at a cost of £53,000 with a not guilty. I've just walked out again. This is nearly £100,000 been spent on this case. What for? And my main thing is the mainstream media sat through this whole trial. They knew all the unlawful practices in this trial, and yet they didn't report one of them. They hid it from you. They hid it from you. I'm so glad that judge has given such a powerful judgment now that says it how it was. I was targeted because of my political beliefs. To say that out loud, the government, on behalf of the government, counter-terrorism targeted me to try and get access to my phone as a journalist. Where's the outrage from the mainstream media in this? They were trying to get my access to my work that I do and my investigations that I do as a journalist. That is a corrupt state. That's what it is.
Okay, so we're outside the court. We've just had Tommy Robinson come out. He has been found not guilty on the grounds that the judge could not find the police testimony credible. He could not find that there wasn't discrimination on political beliefs for Tommy Robinson, and this is likely to have precedent going forward. It's likely to impact upon the cases of other journalists who are being stopped across the borders and also other political figures. So this is a very interesting one, and we will see what happens coming down the road. This is Will Colesill reporting.
Now, Charles, everybody, I think everybody knows what we think about Tommy Robinson himself and what his role in everything is. But I have to say, he does deserve credit for the fact that he refused to give the PIN number for his phone. And as was pointed out in that report, that is something which is generally considered to be an imprisonable offence. It's basically you have no right to remain silent under those circumstances. We'll talk a little bit about that aspect, the phone over the borders thing, during Extra. And the other point to make, though, is the question that I have is about the fact that obviously he has been found not guilty in this case. Many people on the pro-Palestine side of the argument have not been found not guilty in these cases.
Exactly, that's it. I mean, there are a lot of issues which we will cover in Extra, but I mean, this is the thing, the Schedule 7, the specific wording is that the decision must not be totally arbitrary for somebody to be pulled aside under that legislation. And he's demonstrating that it's not arbitrary, it's politically motivated. And so that should that should be something that's applied absolutely across the spectrum. So that's what we like to see.
Well, look, listening to the BBC Radio 4 PM programme last night, Evan Davis is the presenter of that. They covered the Tommy Robinson court case. And as part of that, he spoke to Jonathan Hoare, KC. Now, let's just have a listen.
Well, let's talk to Jonathan Hall, KC, independent reviewer of terrorism legislation. Jonathan, tell me what you make of this case and the bringing of it to Westminster Magistrates Court.
Well, I think I welcome having judges scrutinise the use of this power. It's a pretty exceptional power. The police don't have to have any suspicion at all that a person is a terrorist. And so, generally speaking, if you get stopped under this power, tough luck. There is however, one really important caveat, and this is something that the judge was doing. It was just sort of, in a way, it's established law, which is to say you can use the power of police, but you've got to use it for the purposes of looking to see if Tommy Robinson was a terrorist. And ultimately, the judge wasn't satisfied that was why they were doing it. He thought that it was possible that they were looking at him simply because of his political views, rather than going on to say, okay, these are your political views, but might you be involved in violence in some way? So that's the long and the short of it.
Did I mishear you, though? Did you say they don't have to suspect you are a terrorist in order to use that power.
No, that's absolutely right. You do not have to. This is why it's such a strong power.
But that's not. They can stop anyone and just say terrorism and like, give me your phone, give me your bag. I mean, that doesn't sound right.
So clearly, Evan Davis hasn't been watching the UK column recently. But anyway, Jonathan Hoare had something to say later in that conversation. Let's just hear that comment.
Then you see why it was an arguable case, because in some sense the police didn't really attempt to offer evidence for terror, did they? I mean, it was stuff. He wouldn't look us in the eye, and very dodgy, carrying a lot of money. It was all of that kind of stuff.
Well, you certainly couldn't stop someone because you thought they had a stolen car. I mean, that wouldn't be using the power for the purpose for which it's given, which is to look for terrorism. I mean, I think you have to be a bit careful not to draw too many conclusions. It's obviously the case that when you're stopping someone to see if they're a terrorist, you will often ask them about their political views or their religious views. I mean, that may well be part of the way of determining if that person in sort of violent jihad, do they believe in the great replacement theory? That might be quite useful.
So I thought that was quite an incredible statement, because basically what he's saying, anyone willing to entertain the idea of great replacement theory is a terrorist. Now, to be clear, I'm not subscribing to that theory. I don't subscribe to that theory, but this is no different to Palestine Action in the sense that no one who does subscribe to that idea has ever been convicted of a terror offence, or even, to my knowledge, convicted of criminal damage. And I just think it's quite incredible that ideas that aren't producing physical results are now being considered terrorism. But just to comment very briefly on Robinson's comments about Elon Musk. This is, I think, a really important point. Now, Elon Musk is just about to get apparently a $1 trillion payoff or pay packet from Tesla if this passes the muster of the shareholders. Now, one major shareholder has said they will vote against $1 trillion going to Elon Musk. But what does that money go to? It goes to funding people like Tommy Robinson and other so-called philanthropic efforts, which are all about mixing things up politically. And so, just imagine what happens if that amount of money goes into his hands.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, I think we should not forget that it wasn't that long ago that, platformed by Tommy Robinson, Elon Musk was in effect calling for violence on British streets. So it's, one wonders exactly where this money will be spent.
Vanessa, let me welcome you to the programme. And our lovely Foreign Secretary, Yvette Cooper, has been busy around the world. What's she been up to?
Oh dear, yeah, I do apologise for bringing Yvette Cooper to the screen. But it basically in reference to both genocides in Sudan and Gaza. So looking at Sudan, let's have a look at the history of the British colonialist role in Sudan. This is from the Morning Star back in April 2025. Britain's bloody hand, Sudan's ongoing nightmare. Keir Starmer's 120 million to Sudan can't cover the government's complicity in the RSF genocide or atone for the long shadow of British colonialism and imperialism. They go into some detail about Britain's colonialist role there in extractionist policy since the mid-1800s. Keir Starmer's going to the UAE and Saudi Arabia and supplying weapons. And again, multiple media reports on the fact that the UK is supplying military equipment that is being used by the militia, particularly the RSF, accused of genocide found in Sudan, the UN is told. I have to also point out that there are multiple countries that are supplying weapons to both sides. Those include BRICS member countries like China and Russia. So it's sort of every powerful player in the world today is involved in Sudan. And if we have a look at this map, what we basically see, and this is what I think is coming up, you see Yemen there, you see the Horn of Africa, so you have Sudan, Somalia, Eritrea, you've got clashes breaking out in Tanzania, we'll talk about Nigeria later on in the program, Mali. There are multiple fires being lit in the the Horn of Africa, but in Central Africa also. And in my opinion, it is all part of the targeting in the future of Yemen. So anyway, I just wanted to show this very quick clip of Yvette Cooper's arrival at the Manama Global Security Conference 2025, just to show again how popular the British government is in this part of the world. So let's just roll this.
Thank you very much, Bastian. It is a great pleasure to be here.
Now, I can't quite figure out if they added that clapping afterwards, because I don't actually see anyone clapping in the audience that you can see in the view there. However, to give her some benefit, maybe a few did clap after they were loudly told they should do. But let's have a listen basically to what she says about Sudan.
Reports from Darfur in recent days are truly horrifying. Atrocities, mass executions, starvation, and the devastating use of rape as a weapon of war, with women and children bearing the brunt of the largest humanitarian crisis in the 21st century. For too long, this terrible conflict has been neglected, while suffering has simply increased.
Well, of course, rape is a weapon of war, then perhaps Britain should stop fomenting these wars globally, where rape is indeed used as a weapon of war. Of course, Yvette Cooper was one of the Labour MPs who voted for the war against Iraq back in 2003. But then I wanted to look, this was a later panel where she's asked a question about rape as a weapon of war, both in Sudan and then in Gaza. Let's see how she deals with this question.
Ms. Cooper, thank you for naming the use of rape as a weapon of war in Sudan. It's one of the ugliest crimes that could be committed. So my question is for the whole panel, what are you doing to fight back, not only in Sudan, also in Palestine? There have been tens of cases after the release of Palestinian hostages emerging about the use of rape as a weapon of war by Israeli soldiers who carry British and German weapons. So what are you doing to fight back there as well?
Thank you.
Question further about rape as a weapon of war. It was 25 years ago yesterday that the global community made a commitment through UN Resolution 1325 to protect women and girls from the horrors of war, to ensure that they are not just the victims of conflict, but they can be leaders in peace. And that commitment must not be forgotten.
Well, needless to say, she doesn't address the question relating to Israel at all and what is happening with the major rape case, although there are multiple cases of rape of Palestinian prisoners by the Israeli military. But Israel is rocked by a scandal as a top military lawyer is thrown in jail. In fact, this is Major General Yifra Tomer Yerushalmi, who released the images or the video of Palestinian prisoners being raped in State Taman. And in fact, those rapists have now been released. And this was basically one of the commentary on X, the Israeli soldiers who gang raped a Palestinian detainee at the State Taman Torture Center held a press conference boasting that they're still free. The military prosecutor who dared to investigate their case, an investigation that led nowhere, she allegedly leaked the videos of the rape to the media, and she's now been placed under detention on charges of obstructing the investigation after she allegedly attempted suicide yesterday during the rapist press conference. And if we just have a look at the image of the said rapists actually celebrating their release, of course, we understand that both Yvette Cooper and their partners in Israel are not going to be prosecuting rape as a weapon of war with regards to the Zionist entity anytime soon.
Yes, thank you, Vanessa. And sticking with the topic of Mossad, ex-Mossad chiefs and this situation, what have you got on that?
Well, something that's been brought out by the Middle East Monitor, and it's an interview that the former head of Mossad, Yossi Cohen, gave to a new podcast called The Brink, and it's hosted by Jake Wallace-Simons and Andrew Fox. Now, incidentally, Cohen's said to be pursuing a career as a politician with the intent of becoming Israel's next prime minister. So this interview is promotional on several levels, but just to get a flavour of what he's about and where the interview was going to go, we'll just have a look at Cohen describing how you'd set the scene for entering into a state of war.
Let me tell you about the pages. And I think that this is something that has to be eventually sometimes said. I'm not sure if I said that before, so probably the Brink would be the first to know.
Exclusive.
When you plan a war against Iran, or when you plan a war against Hezbollah, all right, there are layers in that war that has to be planned in advance, okay? So now you go into two different situations strategically. The first one is I will react. They will start, I will do something. What is it that I will do? Accordingly, there is a menu. How many did they do? How many did they kill? How many did they stubborn? How many did they whatever? Okay, I mean, we'll see. Okay, accordingly, I mean, you will retaliate accordingly. If they've done a lot, we'll do a lot. Okay, simple thing. But now, in a way, Israel will defend itself, by itself, all these kind of very important titles. But in the end of the day, if you want to start, what do we call it? If you want to surprise the enemy, there are a few layers that has to be ready to do that. I mean, from the beginning to the top, from up till the last thing that has to be activated. So the war that we have planned for them was pages level 1, walkie-talkies number 2. Then they will understand that we are about to come, right? And then Air Force and Army, full-fledged, everything will be against them. I mean, you don't...
Against Hezbollah or against Iran?
Hezbollah.
Just Hezbollah, right.
Hezbollah mainly.
Right.
Hezbollah mainly. Right. And this is something that has to be eventually understood and said. So when the Minister of Defense says, we'll get them both together at the same time, when the army is not ready, now we are recruiting 500,000 people, right, in one Saturday.
It's quite a claim to say that they're recruiting 500,000 people in one day. But another actor on the world stage with both a flagrant sort of ignorance, but also apparent disregard for international humanitarian law, describing that there's a menu for what he's calling retaliation, but really is just retribution. And note the words, or when he was describing the sort of more active phase, saying, or if you want to start a war. Utterly peculiar, obviously continued in this vein, and he went on to show off about what he describes as manipulated equipment. So we'll just have a look at that. It is.
But this is something that you wanted to ask about, because you talk about Lebanon capabilities in Iran being up here and Gaza being down there, but in a way...
Did you see any surprises in Gaza?
Surprises?
Yeah.
Like intelligence surprises?
Pages, walkie-talkies. Do you know how many equipment, treated equipment do we have in these countries? You don't. I do.
You mean booby-trapped equipment?
Not only booby-trapped.
And spying?
Manipulated equipment. All right?
In which countries are you talking about?
All the countries that you can imagine.
And not Gaza?
Not Gaza.
Nothing in Gaza at all.
Did you see that? If we had it, I mean, we knew something about them coming. Something, right? I would have sold them everything. Just everything. I mean, you can't imagine the quantity when I have invented that method. That was in 2002 to 2004.
The pager method.
The manipulated equipment method. Okay? We have already used it. Manipulated equipment in Second Lebanon War. Some of the elements were speaking to us.
How did you use it?
On a glass of water.
So it's quite the boast, but it seems somewhat inconsistent that either he's suggesting that the Israeli state really does have equipment all over the world, or that they did not have any kit or intelligence on the 7th of October 2023, which would have pertained to what happened then. So it doesn't quite stack up, one might contend. But he's nonetheless very happy to show off, and the suggestion that there would be any issue with behaving like this doesn't seem to have entered his head. And of course, this follows what Netanyahu said in September of this year at a meeting in Jerusalem with a delegation from the US Congress, which was to ask the audience, do you have cell phones here? And then to tell everybody that they're holding a piece of Israel right there. You know that, as he said. Now, you will have seen Andrew Fox on the left of the frame as one of the interviewers. He then put a question to Cohen, and we'll just hear what he asks.
I think, the high-tech stuff is very sexy and very cool. Tanks, fighter jets, explosions are very cool, and Israel's had huge success in all of those things. In your book, you talk about the other aspect, which is the information. The
intelligence,
information war.
you mean?
No, more the propaganda war, shall we say?
Oh,
you talk about
psychological war. You mean?
Yeah, and you talk about the 54-1 TikTok ratio. So 54 pro-Palestinian TikToks for every pro-Israeli one. And I wonder,
that's the number. I thought it's higher on the Palestinian side.
Yeah, but either way, it's
maybe
either way
it is.
Either way, it's a huge overmatch. So you've got all the cool kit and the cool stuff, but they've got this incredible propaganda campaign that has you portrayed as genocidal and apartheid and all that sort of nonsense that comes out. Now, I'd make a case, I think, that Israel's international isolation is almost as much, if not more, of a security threat than certainly Hamas poses right now.
Of course it is.
So how do you account for such an enormous success on the physical side, but such an enormous defeat, I think we can say, on the propaganda information war? How do you account for that imbalance?
First, I think that your description hurts, but it is the truth.
So Andrew Fox there displaying that, frankly, the results of kinetic action being the deaths of hundreds or thousands of people don't seem to matter. It's just cool. So that's interesting. And indeed, we have to consider who is he and does it matter? And his LinkedIn profile, which we'll just look at now, shows that he's associated with the Henry Jackson Society. He describes himself as being a research fellow specializing in defense, the Middle East, and the psychology of disinformation. Now, he's a civilian now, but commissioned into the Royal Welsh and transferred into the Parachute Regiment. Now, he, in addition to describing himself like this, he attempted a joke about the sorts of associations that are made with him and Mossad. So we'll just have a listen to how that played out.
Right. Well, Jake and I are often accused of being in the pay of Mossad.
Exactly.
And actually, I was wondering, when is the money coming? Because I've not received any yet.
Which one?
The money from
your
the Mossad.
checks?
Yeah.
Let me check that. Yeah, let me check that. Yeah, you've never been paid, right?
No, not yet. Not yet.
Yeah, we thought you were a volunteer.
For anyone at home, this is a joke, by the way. We're just joking. We're just joking.
Of course it was.
Yeah. I mean, as jokes go, not very funny, but it's worth considering in relation to his association with the Henry Jackson Society, because as reported by Matt Kennard for Declassified UK in 2020, the Home Office had paid more than £80,000 to the Henry Jackson Society for, among other things, a report into Islamist terrorism and its effect on the UK. Now, in Matt Kennard's article, he wrote, the Henry Jackson Society also appears to have particular links to the Israeli government and organisations promoting Israeli policy. At least 2 HJS staffers have moved directly from the group to working for the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And the report itself, which is on screen now, entitled Islamist Terrorism, says in the executive summary, at the end of 2016, terrorism directed, approved or inspired by Islamic State posed the predominant threat to national security, while Al-Qaeda and affiliate groups continue to aspire to attack Western interests. Interesting to read that now in light of the recent deprescription of HTS, of course. Now, the other reason I've singled out Andrew Fox and his role as a propagandist for the Israel lobby, of course, is because he was back at Sandhurst between 2021 and 2024 as a senior lecturer in communications and behavioural science, a role that would seem completely inappropriate for somebody holding these sorts of extremely partisan views. Now, he appears to have made a habit of being in the right place at the right time, so to speak, so it shouldn't be considered a coincidence that whilst the company commander with 3 para, he streamlined and revitalised diversity and inclusion policies, driving forward D&I awareness, and he just happened to be an Aston Villa fan when the hoo-ha over the West Midlands police decision to ban Maccabi Tel Aviv took place, and he was brought on by both Sky and GB News to comment on this. Now, one final remarkable coincidence is that he is now on screen on the left-hand side of the image that was used in the recent edition of Military Matters, a discussion that Brian and I had about the state of the armed forces as they are today. So a curious character, to say the least, but I think much more to fall out of what has been said in that On the Brink podcast with Yossi Cohen. No doubt we'll talk about that more in Extra, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks, Charles. Okay, let's move on. If you like what the UK Column does, if you'd like to support us, please have a look at the front page of the UK Column website. There is a link there which will take you to a page that describes all the ways you can support us financially. We do need your ongoing financial support if you possibly can. But if you can't support us financially, please do share the material you find on the front page of the UK Column website. Now, tonight at 7 p.m, Jerm is going to be speaking to David Curtin on being principled and unpopular. And then at 9 p.m, join us again for Silk and Steel podcast with Carl Za. And a reminder that yesterday at 1 p.m, my discussion with Del Bigtree went out on the live stream, and so the on-demand version is now on the UK Column website and at other places as well. So this is discussing an inconvenient study. If you haven't seen that yet, please do watch. And at 1 p.m. tomorrow, then Sandy Adams is speaking to Neil Oliver, and that was quite a wide-ranging and interesting conversation. Sunday, a reminder that the third-party part of 1,000 Words with James Dellingpole is going to be for members only on the website. The second part is there now if you haven't seen that yet. And then, Charles, finally, we got an advertisement.
We have, yes, for this Saturday. If you're up in the north, then do get to the marketplace in Crook if you can for 12:30, between 12:30 and 2:30. And among the speakers there will be UK Column's Diane Rasmussen.
Thank you. Now, let's move on then to Sick Note UK. Sir Charlie Mayfield is a former British Army officer and a former chief executive of John Lewis. He was tasked by the British regime to review sickness in the working age population and to look at what to do about the 800,000 extra long-term sick working age people in the UK since 2019. So let's begin just by hearing a little bit from Charlie Mayfield.
Hi, I'm Charlie Mayfield. I'm leader of the Keep Britain Working Review. I was asked to lead this review because there's a huge increase in the incidence of ill health across the population as a whole, and that's affecting people in the workplace. We have been all around the country, spoken to literally thousands of people, and from that, we've then been able to both understand how ill health and disability affects people, and also what things need to get fixed in order to improve how we support all those people so they can stay and thrive in work. So the review is being published tomorrow. What we'll be saying is that this is a very serious problem, but it's also fixable. There's a role for employers, there's a role for employees, and there's a role for government. And everybody's got to play their part. And if they do that, we can absolutely fix this issue with better outcomes for the whole country.
So he talked about the report being published tomorrow. Well, that video was recorded yesterday, so the report has in fact now been published. So if we bring it on screen, this is what the report says. 1 in 5 working age adults are now out of the labour force. That's 800,000 people, more than in 2019, due to health reasons. It says the cost of ill health that prevents work equals 7% of GDP, and they say that that's nearly 70% of all income tax receipts. They say that employers lose 85 billion a year from sickness, turnover, and lost productivity. And so my question then is, have a guess how many times are the terms COVID, coronavirus, or SARS-CoV-2 used in this report? Well, I think you got a clue there as to how many it was, because it was in fact none. So the 10-month review engaged hundreds of organizations, they said, with evidence from employers, disabled people, clinicians, and international comparators. They talk about a category of employers called vanguard employers who are going to be asked to embrace the healthy working life cycle, providing workplace health and work with the Workplace Health Intelligence Unit. We'll come on to that in a second. So this is the healthy working life cycle. An employer advertises and hires an individual to join an organization. They might get sick, they might take time off, and they might get fired if they take too much time off. It seems to be what's being discussed there. But as I say, these were the three main categories: to establish this healthy working lifestyle, to develop better workplace health provision, and to drive adoption with evidence and incentives. And they're talking about creating this sort of surveillance network to keep an eye on what everybody's doing. So the question is this about actually keeping people healthy in the workplace, or is it about further data collection? That seems to be what it's about more than anything else. But the question remains, why is there no acknowledgement from anybody of the effect of COVID policy on this? Because that has had a massive effect. It's like it's just been brushed under the carpet. We don't need to look at it.
Well, it would have been a great chance to have pumped up long COVID as well, and to have encouraged people to go and get jabbed, perhaps. But yes, very odd not to mention it.
But Charles, sticking with sort of health matters and with animals, blue tongue continues to spread.
Can't be too careful. So this has come from the Minister of State from Wales. They've announced there's a restricted zone for blue tongue across all of Wales. And whilst the statement is in large part a push for vaccination, it should be regarded as a significant concession to livestock farmers, I would say, because not only does the announcement stop the process of culling, effectively slaughter on suspicion, but it also permits free movement of livestock between England and Wales, which had hitherto been prevented, and vaccination is not a requirement. And it is quite a big but, it must be noted that the vaccines which are available have a 0 days withdrawal, which means that any milk or beef may be taken immediately after vaccination. So I would say that common sense would dictate that checking whey or milk and beef, or indeed any other products that are subject to these sorts of vaccinations concerning blue tongue, anything that you're not sure about, I would encourage you to check, because among the listed adjuvants in the same information note are aluminium hydroxide, saponin, and thimerosal, which of course is 50% mercury. And if you want to check this for yourself, try looking it up on Google, and you'll find that particularly with the last item, all the top returns on that search are pieces from the CDC and so forth, stating that it's extremely safe. So it's absolutely one to watch, both in terms of this idea that humans are at risk from animal diseases, but also this forgotten element of what it is that actually enters the food chain.
So they state it's safe. Do they state it's effective?
Well, I mean, in effect, that's exactly what they're saying, because that's why they're of course, midges are only part of the issue, but they say that midges have calmed down, and so that's why they're able to relax the system for the time being. But as I say, I would say that this does indicate that pressure from livestock farmers, who've basically been able to push back and say that the situation is completely unworkable, has actually yielded a result.
Okay, well done. Vanessa, let's come back to you then and bring us up to date with what's going on in Syria and Iraq.
Yeah, I mean, it's really a bit of a regional update because so much is going on here. Israel has escalated its attacks in southern Lebanon as we expected and as we've been reporting. But I just also wanted to play this from the beginning of the Oman foreign minister's statement at the same global security conference where Yvette Cooper was speaking, where he presents a very different vision of who exactly is the threat to the region. So let's just play this.
Before the sixth and possibly decisive round of talks, Israel unleash its bombs and missiles in any illegal and deadly act of sabotage. This was shameful, but unfortunately, it was not surprising. We have long known that Israel, not Iran, is the primary source of insecurity in the region. Israel's deliberate efforts to prolong tensions had, in this case, killed hundreds of Iranian civilians. But Iran responded with remarkable restraint, just as it had when Israel bombed its consulate in Syria, injured its ambassador in Lebanon, and assassinated a leading Palestinian negotiator in Tehran.
This is a very brave statement. I mean, Oman has been very open in its condemnation of the Zionist genocide in West Bank and Gaza, particularly in Gaza also. But bearing in mind that Oman has a role as, let's say, the Switzerland of the Gulf, it's very much under the control still of the British that have a 2022 sovereign investment partnership and use Oman as a military logistics hub. So I think this was really quite an extraordinary statement on behalf of Oman. Now coming on to Syria and the follow-up from Jolani's visit to the Kremlin in Moscow, and then the new government or the new Syria defense minister's visit also to Moscow. Russia is now going to be increasing its bases in Syria. If we can have a quick look at the map while I'm talking, you can see there that, of course, Russia already had consolidated its presence in Tartus on the coast and up in the northeast in Karmishli. It's talking about having a security force in the south to allegedly prevent Israeli expansion, but Israel is expanding on an almost daily basis with very little impediment. But also, sorry, if I can just have the map back for a second, but also to establish bases which will be expansion for Russia in Hama and Homs, the two red dots there, that effectively is part of the partitioning of Syria. So this will potentially give Russia control of that coastal area, which to some degree is going to be of benefit to the minorities living in that area. But however, it is still part of the partitioning, the carving up of Syria since the fall of the Syrian government in December 2024. And of course, can only be done in collaboration with Washington, Turkey, and Israel. So that's Syria. Then I want to come on to what's happening in the region, how Pete Hegseth has been threatening the foreign minister, or rather he's been informing the foreign minister in Iraq, the Iraqi defense minister, warned him in a telephone call of an impending operation in the region. So let's have a look at what he actually said. This was a post by Mint Press News. The Iraqi defense minister was warned by the US Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, that a war is coming to the region. In a recent interview, he recounted a call he received from Hegseth regarding impending US operations in the region. There is a lot of chatter on social media that it could be Lebanon, it could be Iraq, it could be Iran, it could be Yemen, it could, of course, be all of them. But basically what Hegseth threatened, and he said that this is your final warning, and you know very well how the current administration will respond if any of the resistance factions in Iraq are not kept under control when this war breaks out. There was a corresponding article in the Israeli media I-24, Israel heightened border security amid growing threats from Iraq. Now, what it's saying within the text of that article is that effectively the Israeli army and Mossad have intensified their vigilance in response to what intelligence officials describe as a mounting threat emerging from Iraq. And of course, what they're saying is that pro-Tehran militias and terrorist infrastructure inside Iraq are going to be launching aerial and ground attacks against Israel. And if we actually have a look of the region, you can see where Israel is considering the threat to be. So if you look at Iraq, this is a map from a couple of years ago showing the attacks by Iraqi resistance on US bases in Iraq and Syria. But you can see that very easily they could cross the Jordanian border and reach the Israeli border with Jordan, but also the occupied Golan Heights. And that is where Israel is feeling the threat. So to some degree, Pete Hegseth could effectively be launching or planning to launch an attack pretty much anywhere in the region. And as I said, many people are commenting, claiming that it could be one area or a collection of countries involved in the resistance against Israel and the US. Then finally, I wanted to finish up with the extraordinary news, really, that President Trump apparently is now going to host the president of Syria, who, of course, is the former founder of Al-Qaeda. So this makes an absolute mockery, of course, of the war waged against Al-Qaeda since 9/11. People will remember the head of CENTCOM, General, whose name has just completely escaped me, talking about Idlib in northwest Syria being the largest, Brett McGurk, thank you, being the largest Al-Qaeda haven since 9/11. Trillions spent on the regime change war against the Syrian government, the former Syrian government, weaponizing Al-Qaeda and ISIS. And perhaps the final cherry on the cake here, and this was made by somebody on social media, which I think is very appropriate, Syrian President Ahmed al-Sharaa is renaming, orders the arrest of ISIS leader al-Jolani. And this is the total hypocrisy of what we're now seeing, where the West, the collective West, but led by President Trump, is now totally legitimizing Al-Qaeda in Syria and including them in the anti-ISIS coalition, despite the fact that a large majority Jolani's Takfiri forces are made up of ISIS members. So quite extraordinary.
Not really sure what to make of that. It is quite extraordinary. Thank you for that, Vanessa. Now let's move on then. Speaking of what Trump's up to, the bombing of the alleged drug trafficking boats in the Caribbean and Eastern Pacific is based apparently on an interpretation of the legal definition of the term hostilities, which is both incorrect and dangerous. Now, that's according to former State Department lawyer Brian Finucane, on this in this article in Just Security. Now, Finucane writes that Trump has decided that what the US is doing does not constitute hostilities as defined in the 1973 War Powers Resolution. He says, in contravening the restriction of the War Powers Resolution, the Trump administration would circumvent legislative safeguards on military action and usurp Congress's constitutional authority over the use of military force. And he points out that under Section 5B of the 1973 resolution, a 60-day clock is started for the withdrawal of US armed forces from such hostilities unless Congress declares war or otherwise enacts statutory authorization for the use of force. And Trump's 60-day clock began on the 4th of September. So following on from Patrick's report on this program on Friday about Secretary of War Pete Hegseth requiring that journalists have reports they want to publish approved by the Department of War prior to publication, he's followed up by issuing a list of topics that Department of War personnel are required to seek prior approval for before engaging with Congress, which includes any and all, quotes, sensitive military operations, and also anything related to US strikes on suspected drug boats around Latin America. Now, CNN reported yesterday, citing, quotes, people familiar with the latest guidance, that a Pentagon and included that a Pentagon spokesperson told CNN that the memo is, quotes, a pragmatic step to internally review the department's processes for communicating with Congress. The department intends to improve accuracy and responsiveness in communicating with Congress to facilitate increased transparency. This review is for processes internal to the department. It does not change how or from whom Congress receives information. Yes, try not to laugh too much, Charles, indeed. And then following on from that, NBC here is reporting that the Trump regime has begun detailed planning for a new mission to send American troops and intelligence officers into Mexico. Patrick on Friday was talking about Colombia being brought into this whole thing. Venezuela, then Colombia, now Mexico, to target drug cartels. And that's according to what NBC says are two US officials and also two former US senior officials familiar with the effort. The early stages, they say, of training for the potential mission, which would include ground operations inside Mexico, has already begun. But they say that deployment to Mexico is not imminent. They say the US troops, many of whom would be for Joint Special Operations Command, would operate under the authority of US intelligence community, known as Title 50 status. And they said that officers from the CIA would also participate. Yes, I think we should quickly move on back to Vanessa then, because I don't really know what else to say about that. This is clearly an increasingly insane world we live in. But you were talking about the Horn of Africa, and you mentioned Nigeria in passing earlier in the program. Vanessa, what's going on in Nigeria that is really pretty indicative of the entire of the situation in the entire region?
Well, the Department of War is at it again. Basically, we seem to be heading towards some kind of military intervention in Nigeria. Listen, basically, Trump said to Reuters, I think it was yesterday.
No, so we need video 12, please.
They're killing record numbers of Christians in Nigeria. And they have other countries very bad also. You know that part of the world, very bad. They're killing the Christians and killing them in very large numbers. We're not going to allow that to happen.
So now we basically have the genocide of Christians in Nigeria, which is being trumpeted across, excuse the pun, trumpeted across the mainstream media, including the BBC that has picked up the story without, of course, historical context or questions. Trump tells military to prepare for action against Islamist militants in Nigeria. Where have we heard this before? The protection of Christians in Syria, of course, under attack from Al-Qaeda having been created by the collective West in order to topple the government in Syria. So I decided we don't have time to go into huge depth about the situation in Nigeria, which is incredibly complex. Today we can discuss it in extra. But I just wanted to take this from a Council on Foreign Relations report from 2018. So this is dramatically showing the density of the attacks by Boko Haram, an equivalent of Al-Qaeda, in the northeast of the country, whereas the majority of the Christian communities are actually in the southern area of Nigeria. I'm not saying there are no Christians in that area, but it's majority Muslim, and the attacks are majority Muslim on Muslim. Then again, let's just look at this graph from the CFR, which again shows from 2015-16 onwards, the attacks on churches basically reduced down to the majority then being on mosques as opposed to churches. So, okay, that's 2018. It could be that the attacks against Christian communities have increased to the level that we're being told, where literally we're being told that hundreds of thousands of Christians are being massacred in a genocide in Nigeria. And then if we just have a quick look, this was an article in Al Jazeera. Gimba Kakanda, who's the senior advisor to the Nigerian president, who's basically denying the Christian genocide, and he's naming Bill Maher as one of the number one components of the rumors regarding a Christian genocide in Nigeria. He, again, also talks about the fact that Christians are, to some degree, being targeted, but the majority of the attacks are Muslim on Muslim. And, of course, if we actually look at the background of Boko Haram, what we discover that it is a collective Western organization. Boko Haram is a CIA covert operation. This was WikiLeaks back in 2014. And this report talks very much, it's from African Renaissance News. It talks about how the US Embassy in Nigeria was a forward operating base for subvertive operations, wide and far-reaching inside Nigeria. And it goes into some depth about who created Boko Haram. It is an Al-Qaeda affiliate inside Nigeria, as is, of course, ISIS, which is also operating inside Nigeria. And then it also goes into some depth about why is Nigeria being targeted. Now, this was in 2014, and even back then they were talking about the potential for weaponizing attacks on Christians for particularly US intervention. Nigeria has been seen as a threat in itself to US supremacy in Africa, being one of the most powerful countries in the African continent. And then, of course, it's a race for resources against Russia and China and other colonial actors in Africa. There is also a degree of persecution of Shia Muslim communities by the terrorist groups, which, of course, ties into the global resistance axis against the Zionist bloc and the West and the imperialist axis. So there's a number of reasons why Nigeria is coming into focus now, but I think we should be very careful about falling for yet another template for military intervention by the US and another sovereign nation.
Yeah, and Vanessa, we keep making this point, but I think it needs to be restated time and again because extreme Islam is a creation of Britain, the United States, primarily for geopolitical purposes. It was deployed in Egypt. It was deployed in a host of different countries in the Middle East, and has been being deployed in the Sahel for 20, 30, 40 years now, in particular. And we got to remind ourselves that the Sahel, if we're looking at North Africa here, the Sahel is considered to be strategically vital for not only the European Union, but also for the Tony Blair Institute. So, we got to always keep in mind when we see these types of stories that there may be something other than what it appears to be on the surface to consider.
Yeah, absolutely. At the end of the day, where we see any kind of Al-Qaeda affiliate, we have to understand that there is high potential for it being a subversive element that's been introduced by intelligence agencies in the West.
Charles, Ministry of Defence.
Yeah, turmoil there as well. 2025, we've had the publication of not only the Strategic Defence Review, but also the National Security Strategy, in which they wax lyrical about national resilience and a whole of society approach to war predicated on the existential threat posed by Russia. And just last week, the Public Accounts Committee put rather a damning report together on the UK's F-35 stealth fighter capability. They said it will not have a standoff weapon, talking about the Spear 3 missile, that can be used to attack ground targets from a safe distance until the early 2030s. They're also seriously compromised by having a severe shortage of several types of personnel, including engineers, cyber specialists, pilots, and qualified flying instructors. And again, that will not be resolved for several years. Then we look at recruiting, and we lurch perhaps from the disaster with Capita to another one, well, maybe in the offing with Serco, who in a sort of parody are still in the phase of recruiting the recruiters. And into this and more, the Deputy Chief of the General Staff, Lieutenant General David Eastman, has tossed a grenade in the form of a letter to all regiments. Now, the particular issue he has hit upon concerns, he writes, all aspects of our professional and social engagements which align with the principles of equality, respect, and inclusivity that underpin our ethos. And he goes on to say, it has come to my attention that some corps and regiments maintain historical associations with private members' clubs whose rules, policies, or cultural practices may not align with the Army's commitment to inclusivity. Now, as a first comment, this is obviously disingenuous in the extreme. This can't have come as a surprise to somebody who's spent an entire career in the Army, but it's little wonder that the Chief of the General Staff, Rayleigh Walker, didn't write the letter himself. Now, as if the contents aren't remarkable enough, he's directing 3 follow-up actions, and he's instructing all regiments and corps to review all of the clubs that they're associated with. They must then go through a period of engagement with these clubs to, and I quote, advocate for change. And then there must be a period of disassociation where necessary. And he winds up by saying that there's a moral imperative and a strategic necessity. So absolutely fascinating insight into what's going on in the minds of those apparently running the Ministry of Defence and indeed, in this case, the Army. Of course, it's not clear whether a copy has gone to the Pope, who will presumably need to reconsider supplying male-only Catholic chaplains to the armed forces. So somewhat ridiculous. But we're going to go on to something slightly more ridiculous, if that's possible, which is that the Queen Elizabeth Prize for Engineering was announced today, and it's said to champion bold, groundbreaking engineering innovation, which is of global benefit to humanity. Now, I might say this is one of the better indicators of where we've got to as a society, because not only is one of the sponsors BAE Systems, which of course manufactures lethal weapons, but the prize has gone to the 7 so-called pioneers of modern machine learning. So that's another £500,000 on artificial intelligence, which of course has absolutely nothing to do with humanity.
Indeed. Well, we've got to leave it on that note. I'm going to say thank you very much, Charles and Vanessa, and everybody that's watched today. We'll be back in a few minutes if you're a UK Column member for some UK Column News Extra. Join us for that if you stick around on the live stream. Otherwise, enjoy Germ and Silk and Steel tonight, and also Neil Oliver with Sandy Adams tomorrow. And we'll see you 1 p.m. as usual on Friday. See you then. Bye-bye.